Good morning and welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Monday, February 23rd, 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as all of the programming you see throughout the day on worldviewtube.com or here on Worldview Radio. As you know, we are a Christian broadcasting network, and it is our mission, our ministry, our passion, and our goal to bring to the great marketplace of ideas the news and information of the day from a Christian perspective. And that's what we've been doing since 2006. As you know, we are a broadcaster who focuses on spreading the gospel. And we do that through the generous help from viewers such as yourselves. If you'd like to help us in this ministry, you can do that by going to worldviewfoundation.com and making a donation. There's an address on the bottom of the screen, www.foundation.com or worldviewfoundation.com. Takes you to the same place. Or you can use the QR code, and it'll take you to the website, and you can make a donation. And we really appreciate your support, of course. You can sign up for a one-time donation, or you can sign up for monthly donations, and that has the added benefit of flattening our revenue curve a bit so we can better match cost to revenues and keep our content free of charge as we stay in the black. As you know, we don't charge a paywall or a subscription for this information. You can watch us all day long broadcasting into the great marketplace of ideas, and it's free of charge, just like the apostles back 2,000 years ago wandering about the Middle East spreading the gospel message. They didn't charge an admission fee or some sort of a subscription. That was a message freely given, and we continue that tradition today, 2,000 years later. And that's why it's important to our ministry. So if you can help us in this effort, you can do that. Again, worldviewfoundation.com, and you can make a donation. You can also help us in this effort by doing business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day on our network. We don't sell blocks of advertising time in the traditional sense. Rather, we know and vet the companies who advertise on our network. And when you do business with them, a small portion of those proceeds comes back to us in the form of a donation as well. So that, again, helps us continue this ministry. There's a third way that you can participate and support our work, and that is to go to our product called The Vault. If you go to worldviewtube.com/vault, right there on the bottom of the screen, that is a really, really great service. And what we've done is Brandon House has been in this ministry space since 2006, and he has written 15 books. And he's had events and seminars and conferences. All of that material is now digitized, and it lives within the vault. Now, there is a little bit of a paid subscription involved, but it is well worth your money to have that tool in your toolbox. If you have a subscription to the vault, when you're looking for Christian and spiritual stimulation and uplifting, that's what you'll find within the vault. And that's why it would be a really great opportunity for you to add that product to your portfolio, subscription portfolio, and then you'll have it when you need it. And of course, keep in mind that vault is also available by subscription to your friends and relatives and neighbors. We all know people in our lives who are struggling with issues, whether financial issues, economic issues, family issues, career issues, whatever. And what a great gift to give that person a subscription to the vault so they too can enjoy the spiritual content of a wonderful ministry that's been around since 2006 and has done such a tremendous job over the years in not only spreading the gospel message, but also uplifting the hearts of those who are part of this community. So it's a really wonderful thing to do. So that's how you can support our ministry. You can make a donation, or you can do business with the companies you see advertising on our network throughout the day, or you can subscribe to the vault for you and for friends and relatives, or you can do all three. That's even better, because in any event, it helps us in our ministry to keep this broadcasting effort available to the global marketplace of ideas, and always from a Christian perspective. And that's why this is such an important thing, and that's why your support, your sponsorship, and your donations really, really matter in keeping us a strong voice in an ever-expanding global marketplace of ideas. Because of the digital technology that I talk about frequently on my show, it's a very, very rapid expansion And if we're not in here with our message, then it sort of gets faded to the background, and we're not going to let that happen. So, and you can help us by making a donation. So, okay, let's talk about the news today. And of course, we are at the beginning of the week, and here we are broadcasting on the Cobalt microphone from the great metropolis of the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And happy to do this. We're coming up on the end of my third year of broadcasting. It's hard to believe that we've been broadcasting away for 3 years. And throughout those 3 years, the key message that you hear and will hear and continue to hear is that we look at the federal government of the United States, how it operates, how it funds, how it taxes, how it spends, and we realize we have a 38.7, I get to say $38.7 trillion deficit. Last week it was 38.5, but we get to bump it up a little bit. The point is the federal government of the United States has borrowed $38.7 trillion on spending it has spent in the past, and it collects about $5 trillion in tax and tariff revenues, but it spends 7 to 7.5 trillion. So we run a consistent budget deficit year after year after year after year, and that's what adds up and piles up to be the the $38.7 trillion in national debt. And this is a real problem. And the purpose of this show, of course, is to deal with and explain critical thinking skills so that people who are watching the show will stop just reacting to the headlines and start thinking deeper about what is going on. Why do we have the situation we have? Why is the housing market so slow? Why are mortgage rates so high? Why aren't people making enough money? Why is inflation 2.5%, 2.7% when everybody goes to the grocery store and comes home in shock? You're seeing more people posting photographs of their market basket full of things on the kitchen table and said, how could this possibly cost $110,000? Well, we understand this as citizens, Americans living in this economy, but it's important to dissect these headlines, and that's what this show is all about. And I think we're going to be talking about this intensely between now and March 17th and 18th. St. Patrick's Day, 17th and 18th, is the next time that the Federal Open Market Committee goes into its session, and they will once again consider whether or not to raise or lower the interest rates or leave them the same like they did the last time. And of course, all of this macro information, this macro data, is being gathered now by the Federal Reserve staff and the 12 regional banks, and putting together what is colloquially referred to as the Beige Book, only because of the color of its cover. But the point is, the Open Market Committee, the Fed Open Market Committee, will go into session and try to decide: does the economy need more stimulus, or does it need to be slowed down a little bit, or should we just leave it a go for another 8 weeks and see what happens? And that's what they'll be debating in March. So we want to be looking at our data points now so we can become more predictive of what their thinking is going into that meeting, because it does matter. The question is, should we stimulate the economy by lowering the interest rates, if that even is that effective any longer, or should we be tightening so that we keep inflation under control? Well, we know, we've been looking at the inflation numbers over the past few weeks as they come out, and from at least the official perspective, the Consumer Price Index, headline and core, we're not seeing a whole lot of inflation in the economy, at least from the official federal government numbers. Now, that's not to say you're not seeing a lot of inflation. You probably are, but from the official perspective, they're trying to create the appearance that inflation is in the mid 2% ish, and therefore dramatic reaction to the economy is not necessary. It's this incrementalism that is causing a serious bifurcation of not only wealth but income in the United States. So we'll be watching that, and I think it's important to understand that we've got about 3 weeks before the next meeting. So we'll be paying a close attention to the labor numbers, which I talked about last week, and the inflation numbers, which came out the week before. And we'll see general information that comes out that suggests whether the economy is in need of yet another bump in interest rates to slow it down, or we're going to cut the rates and it'll go back up. But that's to be seen, and that's what we'll be watching. I did want to go back to the the electric issue and the data center issue. I spent some time last week talking about, I think there were two of my programs and that were dedicated specifically to that issue. But that story rages on. And I want to talk about this in light of the current situation on the East Coast. As you know, we're looking at a major storm that's blowing through the East Coast. And of course, it's from a Wisconsinite's perspective, we get lots and lots of snowstorms, and they're not all that dramatic because we've been living with these since the pioneer days. But when you get to the East Coast, they're not quite as adept, and certainly not as adept if you get south of the Mason-Dixon line or wherever you want to be south of, or south of Illinois anyway. And the point is that these weather situations become destructive. And we know from obviously, from recent history, we had hurricanes blowing into Tennessee and up into places that were far, far away from the coast and causing tremendous damage. And of course, in Tornado Alley, which is just south of us here, we are very much familiar with the devastation that tornadoes can bring over a very short period of time. And of course, these winter storms tend to be very disruptive. And that's why the issue is with a disruptive winter storm, we're watching the impact that it has on the electric generating and transmission and distribution, the power grid in the East Coast, because as society becomes more and more digital and more, well, it's a more and more digital economy, but it's all driven by the same phenomenon. That's that 60 cycle per second electric generation that powers the whole thing. And it's, I don't want to necessarily say it's an Achilles heel, but it's sort of an Achilles heel. When you think about how we power the eastern third of the United States and how much digital technology happens, financial, medical, economic, political, news, information. There's a lot of information that happens on a daily basis, an hourly basis, minute by minute on the East Coast. And every last bit and byte of that information is dependent upon a stable source of electricity. So as we watch this big storm blowing through, and of course, everybody's got their snow shovels out. And apparently, according to a news story I read, which is sort of interesting, if you want to get a job shoveling snow on the streets of New York, you have to provide a photo ID and verify who you are. And I thought, well, maybe if they could, while you're shoveling, you could vote or something. Imagine having a photo ID to actually cast a ballot. But it was an interesting article because it just shows the hypocrisy in how we administer our national elections versus how we shovel our national snow. But the point is, we're looking at the power grid situation. And of course, in a winter storm phenomenon, if we think back to how electricity is generated and then it's transmitted through a transmission line to a substation, and then the voltage is stepped down at a substation, and then it's distributed in a usable level of voltage, 110, 120, 220, to the end consumer. Effectively, it's a very interesting phenomenon that the way we generate, transmit, and distribute electricity hasn't really changed all of that much since electricity and electrification happened in the 19-teens and 1920s and 1930s. And of course, the technology within the circuitry has changed. I mean, obviously we have solid state circuits, and we have all sorts of digital controls that never ever existed in the past. But the fact remains the same, that you have this great big generating station somewhere. It's a coal plant or a natural gas plant, or maybe it's a nuclear plant, or maybe it's renewable stuff. Now we're starting to see more and more renewables. As a matter of fact, there was a story in the news today talking about renewables were 9% of generation in 2007. That was the last financial panic. So it was less than 10% of the electricity generated was renewables. It was kind of a quaint little back alley that certain passionate people were involved in, including myself as a renewables developer. But now today it's 25% of the generating capacity is renewables. And from the renewables perspective, environmental perspective, so this is wonderful. We're making progress. We're moving the needle. But from a reliability point of view, what this suggests is that with renewables making up 25% of the generating base, the generating base is becoming less reliable and less stable. And you said, well, why would you say that? So, well, let's break it down. This is what we do. We do critical thinking here. And when you think about renewables, and we hear that word a lot, renewables, renewable energy, what does that mean? Well, let's think about what that means. There are probably three or four or five sectors of renewable generation that have any meaningful impact at all. And one, of course, is solar. And we all know what these big solar panels look like. And you see them all over. They're up on people's roofs. They're in commercial building roofs, and of course there are great big farm fields that have big solar arrays sitting out there. And they take the sun's energy and they convert that energy through a silicon wafer system into electrical current. But the problem is that those solar facilities aren't producing 60 cycle per second AC alternating current electricity that can be used directly by your computer or your refrigerator or anything else that takes AC power. It is effectively gathered and stored into storage, battery storage, and then is trickled out into the grid after it's converted to AC power because it has to match the grid. And the grid in the United States is a 60 cycle per second generate, transmit, and distribute grid. So when you plug your refrigerator in, or I guess back in the old days, you'd plug in a light bulb, but now we have LED bulbs. And effectively what's happening at the wall, when you put the plug in the wall, is that the electrical current is coming out through the wires, okay? And it goes through the light bulb and then back through the other wire and back into the wall. It goes from negative to positive. The electrons are flowing. But what you don't realize, but what is alternating current, is that 60 times per second that energy reverses itself, and that's why the light bulb is effectively going on and off, on and off, on and off 60 times every second. And to the human eye, you don't see that because eyes have memory. But so sometimes you can see it in fluorescent tubes. But the point is, this is the way electric generation happens. So if you go back to the coal plant or the gas plant and the nuclear plant, effectively what they do is you're taking fuel and you're boiling water, okay, to make steam, and you run the steam through a turbine, and the turbine spins. You cook the water and makes the steam. Steam comes out under pressure. It turns the turbine, and when that turbine is spinning, it is passing the back end is passing across magnets 60 times in a second. It's a cyclical thing, and that's what creates the pulsing of the electric power. And the reason it does that, and you don't just think about current flowing through a wire from point A to point B, from negative pole to positive pole, whatever, reverse direction. It doesn't just flow. The electrons don't march like an army full of ants that are heading to the picnic basket. They don't do that. It's going back. It's kind of more like a rumba or a cha-cha. It's kind of moving away in a 60 cycle per second move. And that's the way our grid was designed. And it goes back to the initial physics problem of when you generate electricity on a direct current, or you make electrons and you push them through a wire, it goes through a light bulb and comes back. That the wires create a resistance that turns the electric energy into heat, and you can't transmit the electricity too far before the voltage reduces to the point where it's not usable. So the only way they could get voltage to go far enough to make this practical was by listening to Nikola Tesla, who was saying, no, you got to do this on and off 60 times a second, and then you can force those electrons down the wire, and they can go way down the wire, and you can transmit electricity a long way. Well, Thomas Edison, the other, the General Electric guy, that he was selling DC systems, and Nikolai Tesla was saying, no, you got to do the cha-cha, you got to do 60 cycles per second all the way down the wire. Well, Tesla's idea won, and this has been the established way we transmit electricity since the 1930s. So when we think about renewables, they're not turning on and off on a 60 cycle basis. They take direct current, put it into a battery, and then that's discharged into the AC with electronic devices that will make that match, so you have matched current, so you don't get harmonic distortion within the lines. So the point is, that's not a stable energy source. You don't plug your television into a solar panel and expect to see anything. You have to plug it into the wall, and the solar and wind is the same way. Wind is not constant. It just doesn't. Wind is nowhere constant on Earth, and whatever generation is happening goes into storage, and then it gets trickled out. So when we have 25% of the grid at renewables, what it means is only 75% of the grid is running at coal or natural gas or nuclear, which is producing constant heat, spinning the turbine constantly, making the on and off 60 cycle per second. So what effectively it is, well, the renewable energy crowd rejoices that 25% of the generating base is now renewable. It puts more risk to the grid. And where we see this is going to be in this big storm that's right now on the East Coast. We see this every time there's a storm, when the lines get iced and things start, the trees fall into the lines and the power goes out. Suddenly everybody's banking goes out and everybody's entertainment goes out and everybody's research goes out because there's no electricity unless you have backup power. And backup power usually requires you to burn natural gas or propane or something that spins and creates 60 cycle per second electricity to keep it going. Hey, I've got to take a break here. I'll be right back, and I want to talk about some of the other economic news, including tariffs. I'll be right back. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now, and we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Okay, so thanks for your patience and welcome back. Okay, so that's enough on electricity. I'll be talking about that quite frequently because it's a major issue. And as we add data centers to the mix and they start pulling massive amounts of load, the 25% renewables becomes an impediment to increasing generation because these data centers effectively, they take a lot of power. That's why you need so much water to cool them. They take a lot of power, create a lot of heat, crunching numbers. And what you can't have is intermittent power. You have to have stable power. Now, you could have direct current transmission. Right now, we have alternating current or AC transmission. That's the big transmission lines you see going across the fruited plains. They are very big and they're very powerful. And of course, they're very dangerous. And of course, they're also driving AC power to 1,000 volts or whatever they're rated at. But direct current is coming, and the Swedes are very, very much in the forefront of that. And effectively, what they're doing because of modern technology is to be able to do transmission of electricity from point A to point B with direct current rather than AC. And that's an emerging technology, a time that has, because of the current control technologies, is a technology that's emerging, and it has some very remarkable properties. So we'll be talking about that in the future as well, because I think the data center debate is going to effectively force us to revisit how we power a digital world. Keep in mind, the coal plant you've got down the road, or the natural gas plant, even the nuke plant they've got up on the coast here, is effectively built for the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It's the old economy based upon old electromagnetic systems. But when we're in a digital age, and you think about it, everybody's changed to LED light bulbs. They don't use a lot of wattage anymore. And in the technology that we have, there's so much like on your smartphone. You have amazing computing power and a little battery you plug in every once in a while. We are probably going to be thinking about how do we power and illuminate and energize the future. And I think the data centers are going to be that discussion because there simply isn't enough generating capacity to run all of these things. And this is the most phenomenal thing as an economist and a business executive, financial guy. You take a look and you say, who would spend billions of dollars building a plant when there's not enough electricity to run the plant? What's the input? Well, a steel plant, you've got, iron and coke comes in and you cook it all up and make steel, Those are the inputs. Well, you wouldn't build a steel plant if there was no iron around or coal to heat the furnaces. If you're building an automobile plant, $3 billion for a new auto plant in Ohio somewhere, and there's not enough electricity to turn it on. Nobody would do that. You wouldn't. The bank would say, no, we're not going to lend that kind of stuff. You'd try to sell bonds, and the bond, they're not going to buy those bonds. They'll spend $3 billion building an auto plant, and there's no electricity to turn it on. We're not doing that. You walk around with candles all day. No, the point is, those are economic decisions that are made at a very basic level. And when you think about it, we're not seeing that economic thought. We're seeing massive plants being proposed, and they're moving dirt, and they're ready to start building these things, but they don't have the one raw material that you need to run a data center. If you're running a bakery, you need flour, right? If you're running an auto plant, you need steel and rubber and vinyl. If you're running a data center, you need electricity. And if there's no, that's the primary input in a data center. If there isn't enough electricity to turn the thing on and run it consistently, who would invest in that? Nobody. Nobody would do it. But yet, here we are. We're watching the dirt being moved, and they're building them. So those are questions that I think the data centers are going to force us to ask. When electricity becomes a scarce resource, it becomes a different ballgame. We've traditionally regulated utilities so that there's enough electricity plus reserves to get the job done and keep society illuminated and everything's humming along just fine. But we don't overbuild, because the overbuilt capacity ends up in the ratepayers' electric bill. But this is different. This is very different. So it's a paradigm shift in how regulators are going to have to look at how do you permit a plant. And it takes a decade to permit a plant. I mean, you don't just go and pop up a generating plant. The people, nobody wants it in their backyard. Nobody wants the transmission lines. Nobody wants anything. The environmentalists don't want the emissions. So it's a long process. So you're building a plant with the belief that there's going to be enough electrons coming out of the wall to power it, when in fact there aren't, because it's just, if you look at the amount of generating capacity today, like Wisconsin, most states are running about a 20% reserve. They'll build 20% more generation than you need, because something's always breaking somewhere. They say, well, you got 20% excess generating capacity just in case, a tornado, lights go out, meteor hits, whatever. We have some redundancy and security in the system. So that's 120%. Well, if you double the demand by building these things in a year or two, you're not going to build double generating capacity in a year or two to match the load demand to the generating capacity. You can't. You simply can't do it. So the question is, do they build these plants and then they just sit there and wait until the electrons show up? That's an expensive investment in capital. You think about that. I mean, who would do that? Put billions of dollars in an auto plant. You think, well, someday there'll be enough electricity and we'll turn that plant on. That's not how money works. That's not how capital works. So it's a very interesting time. Okay, I want to talk about something else important. The tariff situation. Of course, we know the United States Supreme Court made a decision on the IEEPA law of 1977. And of course, they've restricted President Trump's ability to use that particular law to enforce tariffs. So President Trump, of course, had a plan B and a plan C. And the plan B there, and I talked about these last week, is now the 15% global tariff that gives them 150 days. So everybody who's kind of, burdened by the tariff says, well, we can wait 150 days and we'll wait them out. We'll wait them out. But the point is that is in place immediately. And there are other tariffs as well, including the almighty, the almost almighty 1930 Tariff Act, which is the Smoot-Hawley Act, which is really the big hammer. I mean, the president can do whatever he wants under that act, and that would be bringing out the big guns. But the point is, the tariffs are in place. They've been replaced with a lower tariff in some instances and a higher tariff in other instances. And of course, you can see that in the stock market being a little soft today. And you also look at the gold and silver numbers. Gold is trading today at the spot at $5,229 an ounce, which is amazing. And silver's at 87. It's coming back a little bit. And keep in mind, 3 years ago when I started this show, gold was trading at $1,806 an ounce. The big question was, could it ever possibly touch 2,000? Well, here we are, 52.29. But what it tells you is that uncertainty always tends to rile the markets. When in uncertain times, the precious metals tend to do a little better, and the stock market tends, and the bond market tends to be a little softer because there's this always you're calculating risk, and that's what sets the price and the quantity in a supply and demand market. It's effectively the risk, and especially in a speculative risk like Wall Street. So stocks will tend to react a little bit, spooked a little bit, and they're going to go down. And of course, gold spooked a little bit, goes up. So that's how that market works. But we will watch the tariffs, and I think President Trump has done a masterful job playing an exquisite hand of poker, if not sheep's head. And we're encouraged by his efforts. And what we're projecting right now is that tariff revenues will take a little bit of a hit, but you're still looking at about 70% of the tariff revenues. And keep in mind, when the Congress is running a $2.5 trillion annual deficit, those tariff dollars matter. The question is, are they coming out of the American consumer's pocket, or are they coming out of the foreigner's pocket? Well, that's a debate that rages on, but it's something to watch. And if you do the math, you understand the tariff is charging a foreign country a privilege tax to come and sell in our country. So it comes from the foreign country, but of course the theory is, well, that it trickles down to the consumer. It doesn't. Okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go to worldviewfoundation.com and make a donation. And I look forward to talking with you tomorrow afternoon. Take care. Bye.